Do you ever notice how everyone talks about BDSM like it's either fantasy or taboo, but almost no one talks about what it's really like to live it? That's exactly what Deborah and I get into in this episode. Deborah Cat is the host of the Better Sex podcast, and she creates this incredible space for honest and unfiltered conversations about intimacy and relationships. I got to be a guest on her show, and we sat down to talk about what it actually means to live a DS lifestyle day to day, the real communication, the self work, and even how it all fits around kids and jobs and normal life. And yes, we talk about all the kinky things too. So if you've ever wondered what's beyond the fantasy of how real people actually make the BDSM lifestyle work, this one's for you. You can check out Deborah at deborahcat.com. But for now, listen in and enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Dom Sub Living podcast.
Today, we are diving into the world of my guest, Alessandra Madison. She is the creator of Dom Sub Living. Through online training and mentorship, she helps new and experienced Doms and subs live the BDSM lifestyle to the fullest. So, I first became aware of her through her summit, Dom Sub Living Summit, which was really quite brilliant and had just so many good speakers, some great topics, and really centered around the BDSM lifestyle. And I'm so delighted that she's joining me here today. She's a new and exciting colleague connection. And said, Levitt, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm just so excited to be here. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the summit. We had so much fun at that summit. And so we're just so glad that, so many people were able to take advantage of it. But as you said, my name is Alessandra Madison. I run domsubliving.com. And how I got here, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. But basically, my husband and I were kinky like our whole relationship. Like ever since we got married and were dating, we were always kinky. But we would do BDSM things, but not really call it BDSM or know that it was BDSM. But we started having a lot of issues in our relationship too. But we started seeing how, like, having, the hot makeup sex and, being all kinky afterwards, how that really actually helped things, but it wasn't getting to like the real root of the issues. So, long story short, we did a lot of therapy and counseling, but we really just saw how, tapping into those dominant and submissive roles and taking kink out of the bedroom really benefited our lives and made our marriage a whole lot better. So we lived in San Francisco at the time. That's like the kink capital of the world. So we fully took advantage of everything we can get our hands on there and just really embrace the lifestyle, embrace the community, and then so it just became that more and more people were asking us questions. We started teaching more, and so it just made sense to start the website, and now it's just helping thousands of people, and we have, courses and events, and so it just really took off from there.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'm curious if you would say a little bit more about like when you say BDSM lifestyle, what do you mean by that?
So there's different ways to look at it. So everyone kind of knows what BDSM is. It's like So BDSM is kink, and it's technically, bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadomasochism. And kink is just anything really that's outside of the vanilla spectrum, that like normal spectrum. So when we talk about it being a lifestyle, it's more being intentional about it and making it like a way of life and trying to put it into all aspects of our lives. So even though, like, obviously we're not doing kink all the time, we're not doing kink when we're at the grocery store and things like that, but it's still a part of our mindset and our identity. And so that's kind of how we like to look at it, that we're, just making it more like holistic, basically.
Beautiful, thank you. So, hearing you say that, I'm imagining you're talking about the dynamics, the power dynamics of Dom Sub, perhaps the ritual that comes with the protocols of BDSM, and the accountability aspect of BDSM and the Dom Sub experience. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but I will say that, because like you said, it is a power exchange, but sometimes where people get hung up is, well, they think like, well, I can't live the lifestyle because I don't have a partner, or, it's, they're single and or, a lot of times, women will sometimes read 50 Shades of Grey and they think they need to find their perfect Christian Grey. But I really, tell people that the lifestyle is about you and what you want out of it. So, try to not make it so dependent on, either having a partner or just having, the best partner there is, but really just making it about your own identity. So, like, I'm a submissive, and so I try to be the best submissive I can be, the best version of myself. So, even though I have a partner, I'm still doing things to the best of my ability.
Beautiful. Yeah, when I hear you say that, a million years ago, I heard Milena say something about protecting the property and taking really
Mhm.
good care of it. And what I've always taken away from that, and like you said, is being that best version of yourself. Being the most fit person that I can be within my own body. And how do I bring the disciplines that somebody else might from the outside, and have that happen from the inside out. And so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, because that's totally a good way to look at it. It is like, I am my dom's property, and so I do, try to take care of myself the best of my ability, to respect my body, to nourish my body, and do all those things, but also not just for him, but just, honoring myself too, and wanting to be that best version of myself. And he does the same thing too. He wants to be the best version of himself as a dominant. So, having a partner or not, that he is still dominant in his own life. And I think that's something, a lot of dominants forget is, they want a submissive, so they can tell them what to do sexually, and, make them their slave and do all these things. And they forget that they need to be dominant over themselves first and have, that self-discipline and that self-control. And I think that's where a lot of relationships fall apart, honestly, is because, each person isn't doing their part to make that solid foundation first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be tricky when we get into situations where um, well, actually, before we go there, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about the difference between, say, a 24/7 relationship and maybe a play partner relationship or a play relationship.
Yeah. So, whatever relationship you're in, there's typically, those dominant submissive roles. And so they can even look like a master slave role, even things like, a caregiver little role. So that's something like a daddy dom or a little girl, or even a brat and a brat tamer. So there's different ways you can label it, because I know a lot of times people, want to get the right labels right for them. But basically, when we talk about, part-time or bedroom only, that is just, doing kink and doing those dynamics in a scene. So, and even a scene doesn't have to involve sex, but it's just confining it to that, BDSM scene. So, but when we go 24/7 or take it out of the bedroom, so then it becomes part of our everyday life. So even things like eating a meal can have, a power dynamic there where, maybe the submissive serves the meal and waits for their partner to start eating before they eat. They can wear things like, a collar, like I'm wearing my collar now that I wear, outside the bedroom. And so it's just ways of taking it into your daily life, having, rules and protocols. So when you're doing a scene, you may have a rule where like the submissive, can't touch the dominant without permission. But then outside the bedroom, you can have different rules too, like the submissive has to, like text their dominant, within a certain time frame or make sure they, eat a certain, requirement of meals. It can get as like creative and, intricate as, as is agreed upon basically. And so that's why it's always good to have a contract too. So, we always want to make sure that everything is consenting because on the surface, you know, a lot of these things look abusive even. So we want to make sure that this is all negotiated. And so whether you're bedroom only, you're 24/7, that, all of this is agreed upon.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm curious, like if you were to think about some of the things that you might want to include in, like some of the things that definitely need to be included in a contract or a negotiation or a conversation about having a really solid um, BDSM relationship. What would you want to include?
Yeah, so I like what you said that, whether it's a contract, just a negotiation or just even a conversation, that you do need to, cover your bases. And so those would be things like, so safe words. So, when things get too intense or you or your partner is at their limit, what's a word you can use to signal that. And then some other things are you wanna have, like, your hard and soft limits, so these are things like things that you won't do or things that you maybe might do under certain conditions, just maybe other precautions, so if you have any, like, allergies, like if you're allergic to latex or things like that, you need to have a conversation about that, obviously. And then just kinda too, like, what are some like overall expectations you have for either that scene or that relationship and where you want it to go to and just kind of like what your titles you'd like to be, like I said, if you want master slave or daddy dom little girl. Some people are very particular about their titles and titles they won't use or words they won't use. And so those are all things you need to talk about. If punishments are on the table, what does that involve? So, yeah, I mean, a contract or even if you're discussing it, it can be as detailed and cover as much as you want, or just be like a little simple outline. So you can definitely make it your own.
Yeah, I just when you were talking, I was thinking about the words that you don't want to hear as well as the words that you do want to hear, and it because those kinds of things can really shut down the the play as well. It's like, oh, so we're gonna go in this direction, and there's these few things that are gonna take me out. I think.
Yeah, well, definitely, because I mean, people have, traumas too. So, there may be things that, can actually trigger people and, put them in, a mental health crisis even. So, we do really have to be careful, So yes, some things are just like turnoffs, but for some other things, it can be, really, really important and sometimes even dangerous if it crosses that line.
Mm. I'm curious how you guys started teaching together and like what were some of the classes that you taught?
So mostly, again, it was just like people informally asking us because We have 2 kids, so 2 young boys, and that seemed the thing that, like, people were the most curious about was, how do you do this when you have children? Especially being 24/7, and so that's kind of what we started teaching, about the most. Again, we were in San Francisco, and so they have these things called munches, which is like an informal BDSM event. And so, we would teach there and just talk to other people about how we were able to do this, even though, we had kids at the time who were, toddler, age. And then they grew up to be tweens and teens. But, how have we been able to do this with them in the house? And then, it's a little hard teaching skills as the submissive. So, that was always like more my dom's area. But when we got the blog going, because I just loved to write. And so it was really nice to have an outlet for that. But that's when like people really started asking questions and just wanting more information. And I was teaching the basics, and it was interesting. I sent out a survey to my audience and asking them what their biggest struggle was in regards to living the BDSM lifestyle. And I thought I would get questions like, "Oh, I want to learn rope bondage," and or, "I want to, do a scene and, have it be really great." But like the majority of the questions were all, you know, how do I live this lifestyle when I have kids? How do I live this lifestyle when I'm busy with a job or when I have health issues? How do I even find a partner? So it really surprised me that like what people were wondering was not so much the skills and the intricacies of it, but a lot of the mindset stuff with it too. So I thought that was just really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I've also noticed is like the difference between what I have as my fantasy
Mhm.
and what the day-to-day piece of being a 24/7 submissive can look like. And I know in my own life what really sort of came into play was the fact that like the difference in income um played a big part in how could we play together, how, because all of that conditioning around what it's supposed to look like uh
Yeah,
really
I'm
was.
money is huge. I would say, money is like up there with sex in terms of, the mindset issues behind it and, the amount of hangups we have around things, and the taboo, just like we can't talk about sex, like we can't talk about money, you can't ask someone like, how much money do you make? And things like, it's like it's so funny how, yeah, money just kinda seeps into all aspects of our lives and even into the bedroom and our, BDSM relationships even. So, yeah, I could totally see that.
Yeah, and especially when we have this like cultural fantasy of the dom who's like the bazillionaire
Mhm.
who's gonna put you on a plane, and when that's not who you're playing with, like, when the reality of, you know, actually being with another human who has his, all of the things, it can be challenging to, like, really square those pieces together. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think 50 Shades of Grey did a lot for the community. It, made BDSM like a household name. Like my mom, she read, 50 Shades of Grey, so she knows what safe words are and hard and soft limits are. But I think a lot of people do like they need to progress from that and not, live in that fantasy. So it's like a great introduction it can, get your juices flowing and your curiosity flowing. But yeah, it's making it real life and every day. And what do you do when your partner doesn't, own their own company with their own helicopter and, make $1 billion is like, yeah, how do you and you have bills to pay, how do you stay in your role? How do you stay, in that dom sub mindset? And so it can be a real struggle for people.
Now that we brought it up, I'm curious, like, how do you start to how do you support yourself in staying in that mindset?
Well, so for me personally, so I'm a submissive, and so I have some things like rituals for myself. So, I have my morning routine, so that, looks like meditation and journaling and different submissive mantras, and just making sure I'm nourishing my body and just really staying in communication with my dom too. And another thing that like keeps me in that mindset and him in that mindset too is using our we call them, the honorifics with each other. So for us, that's, daddy, or, sometimes I'll call him sir, even, or master. And so using those terms can really help you stay in that mindset too. But definitely, the self-care just really, really helps, but especially the meditation and the journaling too.
I think it's really, for some people hearing that, that could be surprising how much of your own self-care you need to do to be able to surrender and submit and stay in that role. Um, and
Yeah, because it's just like any relationship, like, it takes work. You can't just say, "Well, we're in a BDSM relationship now," and even if it's great from the beginning, like, there's no guarantee it's gonna stay that way. Things come up from time to time, and so you constantly have to adapt and, keep up those self-care rituals. So, and it gets hard, but I have noticed, like, when I'm feeling, like, really just out of alignment, with either my relationship or myself as a submissive, like I can look back and be like, "Oh, well, I haven't been journaling, I haven't been meditating." Or, if it's our relationship, it's like, "Okay, well, we haven't been doing regular scenes lately and that's why." And so really getting back to those core basics and those especially those things that we were really excited to do when we first discovered BDSM, is to just, like, go back to those basics.
and how does having a family weave into the relationship?
Mhm. Well, I would say, like, people think and worry more than they need to. Like, we think, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna damage our kids, and, they're gonna have to go to counseling," but the opposite of is true. And I've talked to, therapists about this, that as long as they see that, the parents are happy, that's all that matters. And obviously, we don't expose them to kink, we don't expose them to BDSM, but they see 2 parents that are very much in love and respectful of each other and polite to each other. And, we try our best to stay quiet. We've done some things, some practical things like, soundproofing our rooms and just, making sure that, if we are going to have a loud scene, then maybe that's the night that they stay at the babysitter's house. But we try our best to just not expose them. But I always say, heaven forbid, just heaven forbid, like they've found out that you practice BDSM or they walked in on you, like, all that takes is a really quick explanation, and I've heard from many therapists say it is more damaging for your children to walk into your room and see you fighting than to walk into your room and see you having sex. Like, so I think, obviously, like I said, take all the precautions you can, but don't worry about it. Like, as long as you're happy and your kids see that, that's all that matters.
I love that. Really putting that healthy, loving relationship in front of versus the fear of all of the other pieces that you're going to see. And it makes perfect sense that that seeing you fighting is more damaging than seeing you in a lovemaking or consensual experience together.
Mhm.
I'm going to shift things up a little bit and ask a little bit more about the website and your work. And I know that you've got a lot of different offerings, and I'm curious in terms of, if somebody is really starting out, they're starting out, let's assume they're starting out, they're single. What are some of the pieces, like what are some of the things that you suggest to them as a basic foundation? Um,
Yeah, so on our website, we have a whole lot. So we have blog articles, I have a podcast too, and so there's, podcast episodes. We have the YouTube channel so they can check that out too, but just really start with those foundational things. A lot of times people wanna take off running and they buy all the gear and everything and they, wanna go to a dungeon right away, but it's like, start with the education first, before you start putting this into practice, educate yourself on the terms and things like that. So on the website, we have, just a ton of free resources and different articles. So, just peruse the things that interest you. And when you are ready to start maybe finding a partner, we have a whole course on that. Or if you already have a partner, but you kind of want to introduce BDSM and kink to them, we have a whole course on that too. So, it's kind of like a buffet where you can just kind of pick and choose where you want to go, kind of choose your own adventure type of thing. But the other thing I would recommend to people is just meeting other people in the lifestyle because, community is so important. We need each other. I mean, me and you, Deborah, right now are having a conversation about, sex and BDSM, and that's what makes everything in life just so much better is having someone else to talk to about these things, especially about such taboo topics that you can't talk to anyone else about. So try to meet other people in the lifestyle, find, groups and events and just focus on making friends too. But yeah, and then when you're ready for more advanced things or you need one-to-one coaching, we offer that too.
I love what you were saying about community because I think that's such an important piece. I learned so many different things from people kind of coming up, and back in the day when I was starting out, we found each other through ads in the back of the paper, like there
Mhm.
was no internet. So I really love how much more availability there is and how much more there is in terms of community and having community support. And I want to say, another thing about community is it can help when somebody is newer to get to understand like what's safe, who's safe. And it can be a really wonderful way to be supported in finding your way into what can seem like a bit of an overwhelming adventure.
Yeah, because there are unfortunately, predators out there, scammers out there. And so when you are learning about these things, you have that, we call it like sub frenzy or dom frenzy, where you just learn so much and you want to, just absorb everything. You want to take it all in. And so if you meet someone online, who's, not a good person, they're gonna take advantage of that, and I've heard horror stories of, women getting involved with men who seem like, a Christian Grey and has it all together, and, they always say, "Well, I'm an experienced dominant," so they're always experienced, and they need to tell you that right off the bat that they're experienced, and that they're going to take them under their wing and mentor them, and then it just becomes this huge abusive, exploitive sexual relationship where they're doing a lot of things that they're not even consenting to, or just people getting caught up with, scammers where people try to take their money and things like that. So it's always good. That's why I say start with education. So you know what a healthy dynamic looks like first. So when you see in all these other red flags that may pop up, like you'll know them for what they are. But like you said, with community, it's good to have friends that you can bounce things off of and be like, hey, this person's messaging me and something seems off. Can I, get your opinion on what you think?
And I'm curious, I'd love to go back and so what would you say are some of the hallmarks of a healthy relationship, BDSM style relationship?
So communication always, so if one person is constantly saying, you don't need to ask questions, you just need to trust me. And, if you're asking questions, that means you're not being obedient or, it it should be the opposite. The other person should be encouraging questions and, constantly saying, is this okay for you? Do you want more? Do you want less? So even in our dynamic, even though we've, been together for, decades, that, once a week on Sunday nights, before, my husband goes to work, that we sit down and we have a weekly check-in where we talk about, what has been going good this last week, what would we wanna see more of? What things we wanna change? What are our goals for the week? In terms of our scenes, like, what kinda scenes do we wanna do this week? Is there anything we want to incorporate? So, just all that communication is really what's gonna establish that healthy dynamic and mutual respect too, and feeling safe. So, even though we're doing, like, a lot of crazy things that seem really unsafe and risky and taboo, there is that sense of safety still that you trust the other person. So even if it is just like a sexual dynamic that maybe you just hook up on the weekends, you still want to be able to, at the end of the day say that you trust this person.
And I just want to underscore the idea. I mean, I think it's fabulous that you guys have a weekly check-in. Sounds like it's on the calendar
Mhm.
and that you can be honest about what's actually happening for each of you in the dynamic. Um, and
Yeah.
so having that space that is, I don't know if you would consider that outside of your roles or like a free speech zone or
Yeah. So we kinda do sometimes. So even during the week, I do kinda have the military thing where I'm like, "Can I have permission to speak freely, sir?" Kind of a thing, if something really comes up. But even when we're having our check-ins, we're still a dom and sub, so I still try to be respectful when I talk to him and, but sometimes, like let's say we had a really bad week about something or something was really stressful, I may be upset when I'm talking, but I still try to be respectful about it. Just because you're, a submissive or a dom, it doesn't mean you don't have emotions. It's just learning to better, control them and express them.
and do you feel like I mean, I know you can't speak for him, but I'm kind of curious uh what you would say, what you think he might say or a dom in general might say about like what is the uh some of the challenges of being, being in charge, holding the space for so long.
Yeah, so I know this is, he's expressed this is true for him, but it's true for a lot of DOMs, and a DOM can be a man or a woman or non-binary. So gender doesn't matter in terms of these roles. But usually where DOMs, do struggle with is it is a huge responsibility to um, in a lot of ways, they wear a lot of hats, because not only are they taking in charge in the bedroom and kind of planning things, if there's an outside dynamic, then, they're almost kind of like in this life coach role of kind of controlling and micromanaging things and it can be kind of exhausting, but they do get a lot out of it. And a lot of people who are doms, they thrive on that. They want the control, and so that's why they get into those roles, and so it's not so much as a burden, but it is just like a lot of work and a lot of planning and checking to make sure they're submissive, is, doing good, is in a good headspace, and that they're happy and getting their needs and wants fulfilled too. So yeah, it does take a lot of work on their part.
I'm wondering, if you were to say, this from the submissive point of view, looking at your dom, um, what would you say is how do you support him? How do you um, support him in being his best? I have ideas about how he supports you in being your best, but I'm curious how you support him in being his best self.
Well, so this is going to be different for every dominant because every dominant, has different needs and wants. But for mine, he really thrives on, you know, knowing that he is making me happy. So just being, grateful for what he does and thanking him for what he does, even if it's just, that we did a really fun kinky scene over the weekend, just, making sure he knows how much I liked it, how appreciative of it I am, and just how thankful I am that he's in my life. And and he does like to be in that kinda like caregiver parental role, so letting him, take the lead in my life and, help me out, and instead of being this independent woman who can do it all, because even though I can take care of myself and do it all, letting him to have that control can, I know gives him a lot of fulfillment too, that he's helping me, that he's taking care of me and my needs.
So letting him take care of you in those places and really
Mhm.
expressing appreciation and gratitude and knowing, letting him know that as he cherishes you, you cherish him.
Mhm. And then obviously there's, the kinky sex, why else would we be doing this, so those are always the perks too, but, but yeah, so I mean, I always say like the more like we make BDSM and dom sub relationships complex, like we forget how just like at the end of the day, like it's just fun to have kinky sex, So, there's always that aspect of it too.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing us back to that. So in a minute, I'm going to invite you to share, like, if there was one thing that you wanted people to get out of our conversation, what that might be. But first, I want to give people a way to support the Better Sex podcast. Because, sex is a really complex subject and it can, as we were talking about, make or break a relationship. And most of us don't grow up in an environment where talking about sex is welcome. And so that's why I'm offering Sexual Mastery Breakthrough Session, a personalized one on one experience for a more satisfying sex life. Because let's face it, a podcast is not enough. You have to have practice. And if you're ready for tools and tips and exercises that you can learn, go to the show notes and book a Sexual Mastery Breakthrough Session. Because, life is way too short for bad sex. So on that note, I'm so curious, like what would you like people to walk away from our conversation with?
Well, if, you're listening to this and this sounds interesting to you, or even just, you're curious about it, I just really encourage you to have an open mind, and to know that these types of relationships are just as healthy as any other dynamic. And, hopefully listening to me, you can see like we're just normal people too. But I would like people to know just how beneficial these types of relationships are, and, even though there is, all the kinky sex that's enjoyable, there are so many benefits too, and just so much that you get out of it, and in it can really help a relationship. Like when we were first starting out and we had a therapist helping us and we let them know we were exploring BDSM and they got to see how much it helped our relationship. I remember our therapist said like, "I wish more people knew about this." And he said like, "I wish I could, prescribe this to people," because he saw how therapeutic it can really be. So I just really encourage people to just have an open mind to explore and just not take themselves seriously either, but just to, like you said, life is too short. And so just really, explore all the different types of dynamics out there and see what feels best for you.
Thank you. So I'd love if you would take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the summit that I discovered you on, and all of the incredible projects and things that are available to people through your website.
Yeah, so the summit was a lot of fun because it was me and my dom and like 20 other BDSM educators, and I really just wanted a way to pull all these great minds together and just talk about BDSM and kink and dom sub dynamics. And so it's actually still available if people want to get the replays. It's at domsubdynamics.com. People can check it out there. So we do the summit every year, and then in a couple months, I'm going to be running my first free 4-day challenge. So that's going to be really exciting to kind of help people jumpstart their dom sub dynamic. We do something called the Kink Bundle in the fall that, again, just brings all these other creators and their courses together in this really, amazing low cost bundle. I think like last year we had like over 30 educators. My goal this year is to have 50. And it's just all packaged up, so, they can get it at one, low price, but, I'm constantly just running just different events and launches, so, yeah, if anybody ever wants to learn more, they can get on my newsletter at domsubliving.com/sign up, but, the summit was a lot of fun. We have a community too, so a lot of people, really enjoyed participating in that community as part of the summit.
Yeah, I just have to give a plug for the community is amazing, and,
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of different summits, and, I was really impressed with the way that you brought the community together and how active the community was or is, and supportive, and, I think that was part of the VIP experience, but well worth it, incredible, support, really great educators, highly recommend that. Super excited to have you here, Alessandra.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I just want to say, is there anything that I might have missed? Anything that you want the world to know? Um, and
No, just that I hope people enjoyed this podcast episode and they, go back and binge all your other podcasts. I've been doing that myself. And so you have some really great episodes on there and just bringing more awareness about these types of topics because and unfortunately, in the world we live in, with especially Facebook and Instagram, just like banning all of us left and right and not even being able to, talk about words like BDSM online, we need, podcasts like these, more than ever.
beautiful. Thank you.
Wow, I love this conversation with Deborah. It's so rare to find someone who's willing to talk about BDSM with this much honesty and depth without sensationalizing it, but just making it normal. If you want to hear more of her work, definitely check out the Better Sex podcast or go to deborahcat.com. That's cat with a K. I'll link everything for Deborah in the description. So go show her some love because she is creating some of the most thoughtful and open conversations about intimacy and relationships. And if you're ready for more honest and raw conversations about BDSM and kink, you know where to find me. And until next time, keep embracing your power and pleasure through Dom Subliving.